Hi, this is Sarah, and welcome to the Albany Made Podcast, Episode 2. Something you'll hear me say over and over is that there's so much talent here in the Capital District, and especially so many amazing musicians. To keep track of what's happening around town music-wise, I check a few local blogs on a daily basis, like All Over Albany, Keep Albany Boring, and of course, Nippertown. On November 28th, I checked into Nippertown and saw the story about Pauline Oliveros' passing. I like to think I'm fairly knowledgeable about local music, but here was a story about this amazingly talented and world-renowned musician, composer, and researcher who is teaching right here at RPI, who I never even heard of. I immediately started digging around to find out more and learned that, in addition to being a pioneer of electronic music, she wrote books about music. She was the 2012 recipient of the John Cage Award from the Foundation for Contemporary Arts. She had a black belt in karate, and she was the founder of Deep Listening. Literally a few hours later, I got an email from Matt Weston, one of our silent film spectacular performers. You may remember his amazing score to Battleship Potemkin last year. He was reaching out to see if the library would be interested in co-hosting a tribute to Pauline Oliveros, along with the Albany Sonic Arts Collective. The answer was obviously yes, and on Wednesday, January 11th at 7 p.m., local musicians will be providing our audience with an opportunity to practice deep listening while celebrating Pauline's life and legacy at the Washington Avenue Branch Auditorium. We invited Andrea Williams of RPI to come in and talk with us about her memories working with Pauline for this mini-sode of the Albany Made podcast. If you do your own deep listening to this episode, you'll hear the urban landscape outside the library window. We'll be back in a few weeks with a new full-length episode. Thanks again for tuning in. Now on to our conversation with Andrea. This is Sarah. I'm in the Albany Made Creative Lab today with Andrea Williams, who's a PhD student at RPI and former collaborator with Pauline Oliveros. On January 11th, we're going to be hosting a tribute to Pauline at the library, and I know a lot of our listeners are not going to know who she is and how important she is to music. So Andrea, can you tell us who was Pauline Oliveros?
Wow, that is a tough one, because Pauline herself in many interviews would say that she's not able to be categorized. So I'll do my best. Thanks for having me, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I did get to work with Pauline quite a bit, co-teaching deep listening class and other classes at RPI with her, which was really great. And before that, we had kept in touch for a while, and I had worked with her when I attended Mills College in Oakland, California, where she also was teaching via Skype, deep listening class. And she did come out there once, and I met her there, and that's when I got to actually collaborate with her musically and experience one of her works where she just draws in all sorts of people and their skills to make one giant site-specific work. So Pauline did everything from improvising, tape music, accordion, various other instruments, various non-instruments as instruments. She practiced with her partner Ione. She was working on an opera and also things about dreams and sleep, all over the board. But they all fell under a practice she created through her own discoveries called Deep Listening. And that developed from 1988. Her and others went into this cistern, this underground cistern, and it was about 14 feet underground, and they made a recording. And it first started as a pun called Deep Listening. And that pun ended up through her working with musicians, realizing how we listen. And she worked with someone who taught her about attention and focused attention and listening. And she ended up taking that and mixing it with other other activities that she discovered, maybe through yoga or Buddhist culture, and just working with musicians in general and paying attention. And she herself had always been an avid listener. But she took a lot of these things that she learned through life and made it into an aesthetic that is based upon the principles of improvisation, electronic music, ritual, teaching, and meditation. So it basically, what she was concerned about is it shouldn't just be for musicians, but everyone could listen this way more deeply. So what I learned from her is how to make a really wonderful arc in a classroom at a place like RPI that is mostly STEM research. It's, science, technology, engineering, and math, whereas most of the students weren't from an art class or music class, or background, I mean. So they would come in just maybe not even have played an instrument growing up and learn how to compose really amazing pieces. And they would be electronic music pieces, but sometimes recordings of acoustics, or even maybe not recordings. Sometimes it would be with their own bodies, and learn how to develop rhythm and just the ability to listen more attentively, and how they could take that immediately back into whatever they're doing, and especially their fields, how important it was to all of that.
Wow. You're really lucky to have gotten to work with somebody with so much going on. So what does the music sound like? If that's a fair question to ask, if we were to look up Pauline Oliveros on Spotify, what would we expect to hear?
Well, I mean, she was highly prolific with recording and performing, so it may be hard for me to categorize and summarize. I have not listened to every single thing, and so I may be missing something, but it went from more traditional composing with musical notes and a regular score and maybe traditional instruments or even the accordion that may have been drawn out. The notes may be extended, but they're still fairly recognizable as, okay, here's some music I'm listening to then Bye Bye Butterfly is one of her early pieces of experimental music that it's usurping some opera, but there's noise. It goes all the way to noise, and there's some pieces that go all the way to just straight up, it can be static and noise and swirls, and, she's playing with the effects of tape decks and machinery.
Yeah, I noticed that her music is really broad in scope. Can you talk about her influence?
Well, when I spoke with her, and from what I've read, her influences were the earth itself. I think she called it Gaia, and her own mother, who was a piano teacher. So she grew up back when there was less stuff going on in Houston area, Houston, Texas. There were lots of cicadas and lots of creatures, and she paid a lot of attention listening to her environment. But her home environment was a lot of piano, so she was listening to the notes kind of blend in with the outside world and the cicadas, and it all became maybe one composition to her. And she later on got I don't remember, there was something like a wire or something before tape recorders, so she was playing around with some sort of electronic device that picked up on the environment before tape recorders, which I'm not that familiar about. But then she got a tape recorder and started actually recording her environment outside her window, and she made compositions pretty early on from that. And I actually started with a tape recorder at a young age when I was 5 or 6, and I feel like in a lot of ways I listened to the world like she did. I ran parallel kind of things related to Pauline before I knew about Pauline. For instance, I used to wear tap shoes to church for a while. I didn't want to go unless I could wear tap shoes because I liked the entryway, and then it just opened up. The atrium would just suddenly open up, and I liked the sound of it. Just like she experienced the cistern and the reverb, and I heard that as a child and really enjoyed it was immersive. It was an immersive sound, and you could feel it. Sound is vibration, so you realize sound is felt. It can be through your feet and touch. It's not just through your ears. So I started recording the world around me, and it took me a while later before I started making music from that. That's a longer story, but I was also inspired by the land around me, the landscape, and I had a drone outside my window, an air conditioning drone, plus lots of birds and creatures, and that became a big influence on me as well. And I ended up having a radio show, now skip to somewhere college age or in my 20s, and I had heard about Pauline Oliveros, and I tried to reach her to, if I could play a work of hers on this radio show about listening to him, and couldn't quite get a hold of her. And I finally made it to one of her shows. So I knew about deep listening. She had trademarked deep listening. So that's interesting to talk about because she was one of the early founders of the Tape Music Center, and that eventually moved to Mills College, but that was in California. And she founded it with men. And it was actually a lot of women who were the first big creators of electronic music, like had jobs for the BBC or, Doctor Who. Women created a lot of what we heard in the 50s, 60s, like on TV and radio, these weird sounds. But what happened was, I don't know exactly, but men, even of lesser talent, rose to the top in what we learned as history of electronic music. And some of the women percolate back up occasionally and have a re-release of themselves as this young woman on the cover. Now they're super old. Like, where'd they go for so long? And I think Pauline did a great job of staying relevant her entire career. And I know she worked really hard for it. I can say that as someone who worked closely with her, that it didn't just come easy. And, she could have a pretty gruff exterior sometimes. And you realize she had to be able to stay relevant in this male-dominated field.
I understand you're going to be performing at the January 11th performance that we have here for Pauline at the Washington Avenue branch. What can we expect that night?
For my piece, I do field recordings, and I'm interested in bringing kind of the urban landscape to a meditative level, whereas sometimes traffic can sound like the ocean, or I don't know, I call them surreal scapes. And it's a way of both heightening our awareness of our immediate surroundings, including the room. At the time of the piece, I usually use feedback from the room itself to immerse people in the sounds. And I can't say exactly yet because my work can be kind of like a diary, and I've been collecting sounds, and we'll see. It ends up telling it's like a narrative in some way, but abstract, that people can take on subjectively as their own somehow.
Thanks. We're really looking forward to that evening. We've had a lot of musicians participate in the Silent Film Spectacular series who I think are going to be performing that night as well. If you've ever attended any of our Silent Film Spectaculars, you know that they range all over the place, and we've had people use all sorts of instruments and non-instruments. So I think that whether or not they acknowledge that they're students of Pauline or inspired by Pauline, I think, she definitely played some part. Would you be willing to share one more story with us, maybe about performing or collaborating with Pauline?
So I really got to collaborate with Pauline and understand her work at the Tower Ring in, I think it was Geyserville, California in 2011. And it was when I was graduating Mills, and there were some other Mills performers in the piece. She incorporated some of us into it. And it was a lot of her former collaborators and the Cardew Choir and a bunch of people all staying at this, not a motel, I don't know what it was. We all just stayed together, and there's ocelots and peacocks roaming around. It was really intense. And there's this tower an architect created where there's two spirals where they never meet. The audience is on one side of the spiral and the performers are on the other. And at the bottom is like a pool of reflective water. And it poured rain, leading the audience there. And then suddenly, when everyone got to the tower, a rainbow came out and this rain cleared. Totally Pauline. That would be a very Pauline thing. And so we performed. There were different pieces. Like at the time, I thought there's all these pieces, and she's having people do their own thing, and how is this going to come together? And I was still very much a composer. Like, here's the beginning, here's the middle, here's the end, and it was maybe always a little more obvious. And I had never orchestrated so many people into one piece before. And she had me at the very end ring out the bells and encourage the audience to ring the bells they got all the way down as they walked down the spiral. And by the end of the piece, after people played on strange instruments and there was poetry recited, but it all made sense together and it all worked so beautifully. And there was a crescendo through all this. She had thought it out. It wasn't just, let's just see what happens. She really wasn't that way. She did plan things out. It was just she knew how to draw on people's skills and what they wanted to say and weave it together very beautifully. And in the end, my job was to take all these crying people and have that. They were just pouring out emotion of this beautiful piece and lead them down to the bottom of the tower and lead them out. So that was when I went, okay, I get her. She's amazing. She's an amazing composer.
It's probably not something we're ever going to experience again. So that sounds amazing. I want to thank Andrea Williams once again for sharing her experiences working with Pauline Oliveros. I'd also like to thank silent film spectacular veterans Patrick Stevenson and Matt Weston and the Albany Sonic Arts Collective for reaching out to us with their idea to have a musical celebration of her life here at the library. And of course, you are all invited to attend this tribute to Pauline at the Washington Avenue branch on Wednesday, January 11th at 7 p.m. The event is, as always, free and open to the public. Thanks for listening.